Although this course starts around the year 1000, the history of medicine stretches back thousands of years. Various cultures worldwide have used a range of treatments, herbs, and rituals to treat the sick, as the Mesopotamians, Chinese, and the Egyptians developed their remedies to deal with several plagues, diseases, and injuries. And war, along with the death and destruction it brought, has been an integral part of human history since the start, increasing the need for the development of medicine and doctors. Yet, the person considered the father of medicine is a Greek man by the name of Hippocrates. Born in 1460 BC, he developed various ideas that are still in use today. For example, the Hippocratic Oath, where doctors promise to do their best to treat the patients and keep information confidential, is still taken by doctors today. He also wrote a book, the Hippocratic Corpus, which is a collection of all his works. Hippocrates developed the theory of the four humors, claiming that the human body was made up of four substances: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. He believed that an imbalance among these four humors could cause illness. For example, he used nosebleeds as evidence of an excess of blood, which meant that you were sick. He also developed the idea that patients should be in clinical observation, and he insisted people ate healthily and exercised regularly. Other Greeks also contributed to medicine and made discoveries such as the difference between arteries, nerves, and veins, the various parts of the brain, and the link between the heart and the pulse. Thanks to these Greek doctors and scientists and the recollection of these works in books, these discoveries and ideas were passed on for future generations to develop. As the Greeks fell and the Roman Empire emerged, a Roman doctor by the name of Claudius Galen, born in 129 AD, expanded on the ideas of Hippocrates and other Greek doctors. He developed the theory of opposites, which examined how people could be treated by balancing out their four humors and contrasting them. So, if you had too much phlegm, which is cold and wet, you were giving something spicy, which is hot and dry. This led to some unconventional approaches, such as the use of leeches to remove excess blood from patients in a treatment known as bloodletting. He also made further developments in anatomy by dissecting pigs and monkeys, yet this led to several blunders such as believing that the jaw was two bones when it was actually one, and other simple mistakes. Also, at this time, the Roman army, constantly at war and expanding, developed and improved the idea of army hospitals. The Roman Empire was also a pioneer of public health, emphasizing cleanliness and providing sewers, reservoirs, aqueducts, and bathhouses that contributed to the improved public health of Roman society. There was also a subtle understanding of germs, encouraging people to stay clean and not live near areas like swamps. The idea of miasma, where people believed that foul-smelling air was the cause of disease, probably helped to save numerous lives, as foul smells often correlated with unsanitary conditions that could carry germs. However, they did not fully understand germs, and it was not flawless. For instance, to deal with miasma, some would just use scents to make the air smell good, light up a fire to drive away bad air, or try to attract birds around to keep the air moving, which, of course, didn't kill bacteria. Places like bathhouses became the perfect breeding ground for many diseases, and several pipes used to transport water by the Roman Empire were made out of poisonous lead. Yet, these pre-medieval beliefs and practices developed by the Greeks and expanded by the Romans marked a promising start for medicine and public health. Although some of these ideas were ultimately inaccurate, some measures were rational and not based in superstition. However, some of these inaccurate beliefs, such as the four humors, miasma, and astrology, became the standard, which limited further progress. As the Roman Empire collapsed, Europe entered what is now known as the Dark Ages, also referred to as the Early Middle Ages. During this unflattering period of European history, several tribes scrambled to take over the old Roman territories and, therefore, focused on war. With more fighting came an increased ignorance towards science and medicine. Some tribes even burnt several ancient texts, not only delaying but reverting prior advancements. Trade and travel were disrupted, and the training of doctors was abandoned. During the Middle Ages in Europe and England, the Catholic Church became increasingly powerful and tightened its control. This led to supernatural and religious beliefs dominating medicine and public health. If you got sick, the church believed that God had made you ill because of sin or just because God was testing your faith. People were told to pray, fast, attend mass, and even go on pilgrimage to deal with sickness. Other supernatural methods included carrying amulets such as magpie beaks to cure toothache and inflicting self-punishment to alleviate feelings of guilt and seek redemption or forgiveness. The church also held a monopoly on education. Due to literacy rates being high for priests and monks and very low for the rest of the population, most collections of books were held in monasteries, giving the church large amounts of influence over what books were written and read. Superstition and religion had now taken the front stage in medicine. Yet, following the example of Jesus Christ, the church saw the importance of taking care of the sick, but their methods were questionable. During the Middle Ages, numerous monasteries also worked as hospitals, mainly run by nuns and monks who aimed to care for the sick and give them spiritual support, but not cure them, as they believed that sickness, as we mentioned before, was a sign of punishment from God. These monasteries were somewhat effective due to their isolation, clean routines, adequate facilities, many of them near running water, and educated monks who were able to help the sick with ancient techniques. As for public health, England had to rebuild from scratch, as many of the facilities built by the Romans, such as public baths, toilets, fountains, and sewers, were either deliberately destroyed or left to crumble during the Middle Ages. This meant that, due to the lack of organized systems and control over the population, a lot of excrement would be thrown into rivers or, even worse, thrown out the window into the street, which caused water pollution and the spread of disease. Butchers were also a huge problem for public health, as the slaughter of animals in public places and the subsequent waste attracted rats and diseases into town. Butchers also caused diseases due to selling rancid food. For treatment, the church continued to promote ancient knowledge such as the four humors, herbs, astrology charts, and even urine charts to diagnose and cure illnesses. Despite the strict control of the church and the surge of superstition in medicine, there were still medical professionals. Physicians were medically trained at universities and acted as doctors, being able to diagnose common illnesses and give out treatment. However, these physicians were scarce and therefore expensive. For the lower classes of society, most would be treated at home, or for more extreme circumstances, sent to the barber surgeon, who, as well as cutting your hair, carried out basic surgery. They pulled out teeth, amputated limbs, and balanced out your four humors with practices such as bloodletting. Surgeries became quite common with war, and many barber surgeons and physicians had the chance to practice and learn. For example, this diagram, labeled the wounded man, gave advice and was used to identify and deal with different wounds. These procedures were done without any painkillers or limited anesthetics, and other questionable techniques such as cauterization, which involved heating a piece of iron and pressing it into a wound to close it, and trepanning, which consisted of drilling a hole in the top of someone's skull to allow bad spirits to escape the body, made surgery incredibly painful, grotesque, and of high risk. Still, during the Middle Ages, surgery gradually progressed in Europe thanks to some key figures. The Italian surgeon Hugh of Lucca and his son Theodoric of Lucca questioned the ideas of Galen that pus in a wound was a good sign, and suggested that adding wine to wounds would help clean them. Another Italian, Mondino di Luzzi, despite harsh rules against dissections of human bodies by the church, led a new interest in anatomy to learn how the body functioned. In England, John of Arderne set up the Guild of Surgeons in London in 1368, and another surgeon, John Bradmore, became famous after curing Henry IV's son, who was shot in the face with an arrow, by inventing his own instrument. Although all these doctors and surgeons benefited in advanced medical treatment and surgery in the Middle Ages in Western Europe, further east, medical knowledge and practice thrived in cities such as Baghdad, Cairo, and Isfahan. The Islamic Golden Age, dated from the 8th century to the 13th century, was a period of scientific, economic, and cultural flourishing which led to inventions such as algebra, algorithms, the pinhole camera, and several advancements in medicine. Under the Abbasid dynasty rule, Baghdad was created in 1762 and became the capital of the massive empire. Unlike the Catholic Church, which clenched to the aged interpretations of Galen and supernatural superstition, the Abbasid Empire promoted further learning and the discovery of new treatments and medicine. The capital became a hub for scholars within its borders, leading to the establishment of the House of Wisdom, where Muslims, Christians, and Jews all collaborated and worked peacefully with a common cause of translating ancient texts and building a huge library of knowledge. This led to several evidence-based advancements in the medical field, such as further learning of anatomy, including a better understanding of the lungs, the eyes, and the jaw. They also invented new surgical instruments and numerous new procedures. For example, the medical doctor Avicenna determined the best location for a hospital by hanging meat in different areas of Baghdad and observing where it took the longest to rot. He would then choose the site where the meat stayed fresh the longest. These evidence-based procedures, information, and inventions were well preserved. For instance, the Muslim surgeon Abul Qasis wrote a 30-volume medical book, Al-Tasrif, in the year 1000 that included treatments, injuries, medical equipment, and surgeries for future generations to learn from. Public health was also advanced in the Abbasid Empire compared to Western Europe. Many major cities in the Islamic Empire included several hospitals, public baths, and piped water. As time progressed, through trade and the bloody crusades that brought Europeans to the Middle East, much of the information produced and saved throughout the Islamic Golden Age reached and spread throughout Europe. For example, Crusaders brought back soap from the Middle East to Europe. These valuable advancements, however, didn't spread through Europe quick enough, as a devastating disease swept through Europe beginning in the 1340s. Starting in China and spread by rats and fleas, The Black Death, an incredibly contagious epidemic disease, which was probably a combination of the bubonic and pneumonic plagues, began to spread throughout the European continent, arriving in England probably brought by a rat arriving in a ship in 1348. There were various interpretations of the causes of the disease. Many believed, particularly promoted by the church, that it was divine punishment for human sins, while others blamed the movements of the planet. Some thought the disease was spreading by foul-smell air or miasma, and others turned to the traditional scapegoat, the Jews, accusing them of poisoning the wells. However, the actual reason for the rapid spread of the disease were more pragmatic than superstitious. As mentioned before, public health was poor, with feces and dead animals often thrown into the streets. These and other unhygienic practices, combined with a disregard for laws, created an ideal environment for rats and fleas to thrive and transmit the disease. Many would die a few days or even the morning after these symptoms appeared. Hardly anyone who caught it survived. To fight the disease, many resorted to superstition remedies like prayer, confessing, and self-flagellation. Due to the belief in miasma, people burned candles, oils, and aromas and carried flowers around, and others, in desperation, turned to more extreme measures, such as drinking vinegar, standing next to a fire, bloodletting, and drinking mercury. More effective techniques included avoiding the sick, quarantining, or straight up leaving the country. The government had a limited response. In April 1349, King Edward III ordered the mayor of London to clean the streets and ordered bishops to organize public displays of prayers and confessions, which probably didn't help much. The Black Death was catastrophic for Europe and England. It killed 75 to 200 million people in just a few years, wiping out about 30 to 50% of Europe's population, making it the deadliest pandemic in human history. After the Black Death, which didn't actually go away, persisting through minor outbreaks and returning in a major way in the Great Plague of 1665, significant societal changes followed. Whole villages had been wiped out, and half of the population in major cities had perished. There was a severe lack of labor, and the people who survived demanded higher wages. This led to discontent within the population, leading to the Peasant Revolt of 1381. Landowners changed their ways of farming, substituting agriculture for sheep farming as it required fewer workers, and all these factors led to major food shortages and social instability. Although the government took some measures, such as introducing fines for actions such as dumping garbage in the streets and rivers or butchers throwing away animal waste, these needed to be more tightly regulated. This meant that most of the problems that caused the pandemic to get out of hand in the first place would persist for centuries to come. Going into the 15th century, a period known as the Renaissance commenced. The French term Renaissance, which translates to rebirth in English, refers to a cultural movement that began in the late 1400s in Italy, later expanding into the rest of Europe and eventually reaching England. During this rebirth, Europeans looked back at their Greek and Roman past, not to return to it, but to use it as inspiration to promote classical philosophy, literature, and art, and to rejuvenate and advance society beyond the stagnation of the Middle Ages. Thus, artists, scientists, discoverers, and anyone infected by this rebirth began challenging common traditions and experimenting in different fields. Due to the rise of early capitalism, wealthy merchants, businessmen, and even royal families began to fund scholars, explorers, and artists. The discovery of America literally changed the way people understood the globe and introduced new products to Europe such as potatoes, chocolate, tomatoes, bananas, and tobacco, which we take for granted today. The invention of the printing press allowed new ideas such as humanism and the Reformation to spread fast and widely and challenge the all-powerful Catholic Church. This change in perspective declined the Catholic Church's power throughout Europe, allowing many to think outside the traditional medieval boundaries. The Renaissance eventually impacted medicine and public health as well. There was a renewed interest in finding out how the body works. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci incorporated scientific principles to recreate the human body with extraordinary precision. There was a significant increase in the importance of sharing and developing information in medicine and surgery. For example, the Royal College of Physicians, set up in 1518, was an organization in England focused on sharing ideas and setting high standards for qualified physicians. Now, let's examine what I like to call the Big Three, or the VPH. Three Renaissance surgeons that significantly expanded and published new techniques and ideas to improve surgery throughout the 16th and 17th century in Europe. First came Andreas Vesalius, an ambitious physician born in Flanders, who was a pioneer in the medical field and even was appointed as personal physician to the powerful Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. Vesalius was able to perform dissections on humans as a local judge allowed him to use the bodies of executed criminals for dissection. Vesalius compiled his experience and discoveries into a book named The Fabric of the Human Body, written in 1543. In this book, he included illustrations and proof disputing prior mistaken knowledge of human anatomy, such as finding out that the human jaw was one bone and not two. His book served as a statement to other medical doctors around Europe, not just to accept traditional teachings, but to investigate themselves to find the truth. His book was also used to train physicians across Europe and eventually in England, but we'll get to that later. Another pioneer, Ambroise Paré, also made several discoveries and advancements in the medical field. Born in France in the early 16th century, he rose from humble beginnings to become a master surgeon and became the royal surgeon to 4 French kings. Known as the father of modern surgery, Paré introduced and promoted gentleness and imperial observation to the front of surgery. He deserted the common idea of closing gunshots with cauterization, which he realized made it worse for the patient, as putting hot burning oil in your skin probably hurts a little bit. But during a battle, he ran out of oil and instead used a more soothing ointment that was used by the Romans in the past, made out of egg yolk, rose oil, and turpentine. He also designed various surgical instruments and techniques, including ligatures to close wounds, clamps, and forceps to enhance surgical precision. As an army surgeon, Paré treated many amputees, which led to him designing various cool and futuristic examples of artificial limbs. He also emphasized the importance of pain management. Although anesthetics had not been invented yet, he used opium to relieve some of the patient's pain. Overall, Paré achieved notable success, and his innovative ideas profoundly influenced future surgeons and physicians. He documented his techniques and observations in several influential works, including Treatise of Surgery, published in 1564, and Works on Surgeries, published in 1575, ensuring that his contributions would be passed on for future generations. To complete the big 3 of Renaissance surgeons, we have the English doctor William Harvey. Born in 1578, Harvey was educated at the University of Padua in Italy, the same as Vesalius, later returning to England to work at the St. Bartholomew's Hospital in London. He also joined the Royal College of Physicians and became the physician of James I. Harvey expanded on the ideas that Vesalius and other scholars at Padua had been working on, by focusing on dissecting human hearts and vessels and other creatures like frogs. He discovered that cold-blooded animals had slow-beating hearts and found out that valves in blood vessels prevent backward flow. He did an experiment where he attempted to pump liquid through the valves in reverse, which failed, therefore proving that blood flows only in one direction within the vessels. His theories were published in 1628 in a book called An Anatomical Account of the Motion of the Heart and Blood. As he was a high-profile surgeon and had worked with the king, his ideas on blood transport and transfusion were widely spread throughout England. For example, a follower of Harvey, Richard Lower, made the first blood transfusion in 1665. But a lot of these transfusions failed, which we will discover why in part 4. This also meant that many throughout Europe and England stopped believing in the old ideas of Galen. The work of the big 3, Vesalius, Paré, and Harvey, greatly impacted further developments in Britain. Thomas Geminus, a Flemish author who migrated to England around 1540, published a slightly shorter version of Vesalius' work, adding eye-catching illustrations, which became quite well known and spread these new ideas in England. An English surgeon, William Clowes, wrote several books on the development of surgery during the Elizabethan age. Clowes and Geminus' work introduced medical knowledge from the rest of Europe into England. Additionally, around the 17th century, the Royal Society, founded around 1660, aimed to further scientific understanding, regulating and sharing scientific knowledge, and encouraging the development of science in Britain. However, it's important to mention that no matter how promising these advances were, several people still disagreed and attempted to label these new ideas as absurd, as they contradicted the ingrained views of Galen and the Church. Additionally, many inaccurate beliefs still prevailed through the Renaissance. Supernatural techniques were still going strong, and other theories such as miasma and the 4 humors were still prevalent and employed up to the 18th century. Therefore, around the 17th century, medical ideas and beliefs were a mixture of traditional and new treatments. For example, let's compare 2 prominent doctors of the 17th century. Nicholas Culpeper's scientific and medical approach was rooted on traditional medicine, focusing on plants, astrology, bloodletting, and purging to deal with diseases. On the contrary, Thomas Sydenham, who became known as the English Hippocrates, focused on careful observation of the patient and wrote a book, Medical Observations, in 1676 that became a standard textbook for future doctors. He believed that diseases did not vary from person to person, but that instead there were several distinct diseases and that doctors needed to carefully identify and categorize these before recommending a cure. Public health was also complicated during this time. Between 1500 and 1750, Britain's population grew from 2.5 to 6 million, leading to several famines until new farming techniques in the 18th century provided more food. By 1750, industries like coal mining and other new jobs expanded, and trade, driven by colonialism, became a significant part of the economy as populations grew across Europe. However, colonialism and trade with America and the rest of the world brought some issues to Britain, though they were minor compared to the horrific exploitation going on in the colonies. Everyone was now hooked on trendy beverages such as hot chocolate, tea, coffee, and of course, with that, high amounts of sugar, which led to new dietary concerns and health issues. But don't worry, most of the impoverished people did not have to worry about high levels of sugar or coffee addictions, as they had barely any food. Living conditions in towns were still flawed, with bad infrastructure, water, waste removal, and of course, several plagues, but we'll think about those later. After 1660, cheap gin became a popular escape for the poor, leading to the gin craze, with widespread alcohol abuse, crime, and poverty. Early regulations failed, but the stricter 1751 Gin Act, where the government imposed harsher penalties and tighter controls, finally curbed the issue. Doctors and physicians were still expensive for most of the population, so barber surgeons were still a thing, cutting hair and maybe your leg. There were also apothecaries and quacks who had little to no medical training but a good understanding of plants and herbs for treatment, and they focused on selling medicines and potions to the sick. Hospitals also significantly increased in number and importance throughout the 17th and 18th century. Although the monasteries, which had served as the old hospitals of the past, were closed down by Henry VIII around the 1530s, towns and cities opened actual hospitals as St. Bartholomew's Hospital and St. Thomas Hospital in London. Hospitals evolved into far more impressive institutions compared to the small centers of religious care and refuge of the medieval period. Hospitals were gradually becoming places to treat the sick rather than places for people to rest and pray. There were also slow changes to the way people dealt with diseases. Many swamps were drained because of the belief in miasma, and people became a little bit more sanitary, washing and changing their clothes a little bit more often. Additionally, due to the boom in exploration around this time, new medications became available to the population, such as opium, which arrived from Turkey, and other drugs such as tobacco and cinchona from the Americas. Unfortunately, the plague returned to England in 1665. This epidemic became known as the Great Plague, and, as its predecessor, it was the bubonic plague, which spread due to poor sanitation, a lack of sewer system, and vermin such as rats and fleas. However, London's population speculated that it was due to miasma, God being mad at them, and the dogs and the cats that roamed the city. Yet, the English population had learned a little bit from past mistakes, and there was a more organized and coordinated response to the Great Plague than the Black Death. Government action was surprisingly fast and effective. As news arrived of a deadly disease spreading throughout Europe, a quarantine of ships coming to London was implemented. Plague doctors, dressed up in protective suits, went around documenting infections and deaths. If someone in a household was infected, the people inside the house were locked inside, forced to quarantine for 40 days, and the door was marked with a red cross and guarded by watchmen. Bodies were removed at night and buried in mass plague pits. Trade came to a halt, borders were closed, and the gathering of crowds in theaters and big masses was banned, and orders were issued to clean the streets. These methods were successful, managing to slow down and deal with the disease more methodically compared to the rampage of the Black Death. Yet there were some less successful methods too. As many believed that the spreading of the disease was due to the dogs and cats in the street, the mayor of London ordered to kill them all, which, besides being sad, probably made things worse, as the cats and the dogs contributed to the slowing down of the disease by eating the rats. Due to the belief in miasma, people were told to smoke and to start large fires in the street, believing that it was the bad air that caused the disease. To treat the sickness, traditional methods were still in place. Still believing in the four humors, doctors used bloodletting and leeches to purge and cure the patients. Also, prayer and supernatural treatments were common, such as using frogs, pigeons, snakes, and scorpions to try and draw the poison out. The doctors who implemented these treatments wore leather cloaks, gloves, and masks coated in wax, covering their whole bodies. The mask contained herbs to avoid smelling the streets, and the wax prevented blood or pus from soaking into the coat, therefore avoiding the disease. The doctors would also carry a stick to hit the disobedient or to separate themselves from infected people. This outfit, like the masks worn during COVID-19, saved the lives of numerous doctors. By the end of 1665, the Great Plague had killed around 100,000 people, almost a quarter of the population of London. Still, the fast and organized mobilization by the government helped to prevent many deaths and slow down the disease. By 1666, the plague began slowing down due to government measures, cold weather that helped to kill fleas and rats, and also because rats started to develop a resistance to the disease. Although unrelated, the Great Fire of London in 1666 led to a significant rebuilding of London. Buildings were built a little bit more spread out, and sewers were built underground, reducing the chance of a future outbreak and improving the overall public health in London. As the 18th and 19th century progressed, the medical advancements initiated by the Renaissance continued to develop. The Enlightenment, a cultural and intellectual movement that emerged in Europe during this time, championed the individual's capacity for independent thought and survival, free from the control of authorities like the church and nobility. The Industrial Revolution changed the way society worked, leading many to abandon all ideas as the church's influence weakened and new scientific discoveries emerged. This period between the mid-18th century and the start of the 20th century was, as we will see, marked by significant advancements in medicine and scientific progress. But first we're going to talk about the living conditions and societal changes the general population faced at this time. Around the 1750s, the Industrial Revolution began, replacing human hands with machines, which meant higher production, higher profits, higher energy, and new technologies such as the telegraph, trains, steamships, and cars. This led to significant changes in society. Throughout the 1800s, industrialization and improved transportation caused Britain's cities to grow rapidly. Thousands of people from the countryside, now unemployed or earning lower wages due to the advances in farming machinery and reduced demand for labor, moved in large numbers to industrial towns like London, Sheffield, Birmingham, Leeds, Manchester in search of jobs and opportunities. The growing density in the city squeezed the population even closer, still with appalling conditions, water quality, and a lack of sewer systems. For example, factory owners built rows of back-to-back cheap houses, an effective and profitable way to squeeze workers together and close to their workplace. People would also live in lodging houses, where whole families would be divided into smaller rooms where about 10 people would share a small, dirty, overcrowded room with only one toilet. Houses were also of horrible quality, damp inside, hard to heat up, and exposed to floods and other disasters. Factories also burned huge amounts of coal, generating air pollution and smog all over the rows of back-to-back houses, the crowded cities, and narrow streets, causing breathing difficulties, diseases, and death. Due to these conditions, several diseases such as smallpox, typhoid, tuberculosis, and cholera thrived, killing millions in Europe and Britain. But this is a whole nother story, so we will talk about it later in the video. Still, there were some positive improvements in society. Mostly funded by the wealthy, hospitals experienced a vast increase in numbers and several developments throughout the 18th and 19th century. There was a more precise focus on cleanliness due to groundbreaking discoveries that we'll see later. Special departments were created for specific tasks, like wards to keep patients with contagious diseases separate. Nurses, doctors, and surgeons received better training, which meant that more junior doctors could learn by working directly with the patients. New types of hospitals appeared, like Bethlehem, a mental hospital in London, and Savoy Hospital, which was a military hospital where citizens were removed to make more room for injured soldiers. There were also advancements in nursing and hospital care. Florence Nightingale was an influential nurse born in 1820 who had a significant impact on the way that hospital care worked. She attended the first nurses training school in Germany and led a team of 38 nurses at a military hospital during the Crimean War. During this conflict, she was shocked by the poor conditions in the military hospitals, including their lack of cleanliness and the high death rates among injured soldiers. Consequently, she focused on improving hygiene and ensuring fresh air, as she was an avid believer in the miasma theory. She also emphasized the importance of funding nursing training by publishing articles in newspapers, writing various books, and establishing a training school for nurses and midwives. A key figure now working in these new and improved hospitals was Scottish doctor John Hunter. Born in 1728, Hunter was a pioneer in scientific surgery and an early advocate for scientific observation and medical education during the 18th century. He was trained as a surgeon at St. Bartholomew's Hospital and dedicated his career to the military and the collection of all sorts of animals and human specimens. By the end of his life, John Hunter had collected a total of 14,000 specimens, including the so-called Irish giant, a man who was famous around London for his huge height and size. Hunter was also a prominent doctor and a leading member of the Royal Society, responsible for training several important doctors such as Edward Jenner, who we will go into detail in a second. Most importantly for the development of surgery and medicine, Hunter encouraged and instilled in his students to follow careful scientific methods when developing their skills, which became a stable practice for the future education of surgeons and doctors. You could say that John Hunter was a catalyst for the beginning of a medical revolution. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the ideas of Galen and the four humors began to lose relevance due to several discoveries. So, let's take a look at what advancements happened in this medical revolution. The bubonic plague wasn't the only epidemic to severely impact the European population. During the 18th century, English towns were devastated by the ancient and gruesome disease of smallpox, which killed an estimated 400,000 people annually, with one-third of the survivors going blind. Also known as the speckled monster, this disease caused several rashes all over the body and had a high mortality rate, especially in young children. It was commonly known that smallpox survivors would become immune to the disease. Long before the 18th century, people in Africa, India, China, and the Middle East practiced a procedure known as inoculation. This was an unorthodox approach, where your wrists and ankles would be cut open and the pus from a smallpox patient was introduced into your bloodstream. This dangerous procedure worked, as it didn't fully give you the disease, but it prevented you from contracting it in the future. Inoculation was introduced to Europe in 1721 by Lady Mary Montagu, an aristocrat married to the British ambassador to Turkey. While in Istanbul, she observed that, due to the practice of inoculation, transmission and mortality rates of smallpox were lower in Turkey than in England. While the procedure was not exact and some patients fully contracted the disease, Lady Mary saw its benefits in her children and promoted it back home in England. Many doctors didn't fully trust or believe her, but thanks to positive results and her persistence, having lost several friends and family to smallpox, the practice of inoculation became well known and sometimes used in England. As you might have guessed, this was a very early prototype of what we know today as vaccines. But it wasn't until Edward Jenner and his discoveries that vaccines would be first developed. Born in 1749, Edward was a young and curious child, interested in science and medicine. At the age of 21, Jenner became a student of John Hunter, where he grew his passion for science, biology, and experimenting in general. His biggest discovery, however, came from the idea that milkmaids, who spent hours every day around cows, would apparently rarely contract smallpox compared to everyone else. Therefore, he hypothesized that cowpox, a mild disease that affected cows and could spread to humans, could be used as a deliberate protection against smallpox. In May 1796, Jenner inoculated an 8-year-old boy, his gardener's son, with pus from a dairymaid infected with cowpox. The boy experienced mild symptoms, but recovered quickly. Jenner inoculated him again, this time with smallpox matter, and the boy showed no signs of the disease. Therefore, he was immunized. After repeating the experiment 16 times, Jenner concluded that cowpox protected people against smallpox, which was the first step in eradicating smallpox. His colleague, Richard Dunning, would later refer to his procedure as vaccination, after the Latin word for cow, vacca. Edward Jenner published his findings in 1798, but because he could not exactly explain how vaccination worked, the church and many doctors, especially those profiting from treating smallpox, opposed his ideas. Even the Royal Society refused to publish Jenner's discoveries. It wasn't until 1802 that the English Parliament acknowledged Jenner's work. The royal family got vaccinated, and in 1853, the British government made smallpox vaccination mandatory, fully accepting his ideas. Jenner's missing piece to fully explain why his experiments worked came later in the 19th century. Microscopes were invented around the 16th century, allowing doctors to see blurry germs for the first time. But doctors couldn't believe that something so small and insignificant as germs could cause such devastating diseases and death in something as big as a human. Many once believed in the now disproven theory of spontaneous generation, which suggested that germs and microorganisms spontaneously appeared as a result of disease. Today we understand that it is actually the other way around. Germs and microorganisms are the cause of disease, not the consequence. The discovery of bacteria by the Dutch businessman Anthony van Leeuwenhoek, who was just trying to improve the quality of his textiles in 1676, was groundbreaking. However, as he was not a scientist, his attempt to reach the Royal Society was complicated, as they didn't fully grasp the significance of his findings and continued to believe in the erroneous idea of spontaneous generation, maintaining a basic understanding of germs. It wasn't until the French chemist Louis Pasteur that the theory of spontaneous generation was debunked, proving that germs, not chemicals or smells, cause decay and disease. While investigating why wine in France was spoiling, he discovered that bacteria was causing the problem. To prevent contamination, Pasteur used a simple procedure. He heated the wine up in a process now known as pasteurization, which is of course named after him. Today, this process is applied to many foods and beverages, particularly milk, to kill bacteria and make it safe to consume. Pasteur also proved that germs were all around us, some of them harmful and causing diseases. He proved this by adding broth to 2 swan flasks and boiling them to kill any germs. He then broke one of the flasks and left the other one sealed. As he saw that the one he exposed to the air went bad, he proved his theory that microbes were in the air and could cause diseases. Pasteur also saved the French silk industry and created vaccines for both chicken cholera and anthrax. He also developed the rabies vaccine, making significant advances in vaccinations, immunology, and preventative medicine. Pasteur's work was incredibly significant, publishing his findings on germ theory in 1861. He is a major reason why we wash our hands regularly today, why we can safely drink milk and know we're not going to die, and why doctors sterilize their tools and hands before treating patients. Although Pasteur's germ theory was correct, during the late 19th century his ideas were still debated, as most doctors at the time still couldn't believe that something so small could do so much damage. A German scientist, Robert Koch, expanded on Pasteur's ideas and became a major influence in the scientific revolution of the 19th century. Koch and his assistants perfected a lens to photograph microbes. They learned that dyes helped to make bacteria visible and identifiable under a microscope, and therefore published the first photographs of bacteria. He also developed a method to prove that microorganisms cause a disease, with 4 rules known as Koch's postulates. First, the microorganism must be found in all sick animals, but not in the healthy ones. Second, it should be isolated from a sick animal and grown in a lab. Next, the lab-grown microorganism must cause the disease when introduced to a healthy animal. And finally, the same microorganism must be found in the newly sick animal. Thanks to his scientific methods and discoveries, Koch proved that germs were extremely diverse, identifying the microbe responsible for deadly diseases such as anthrax, cholera germs, and tuberculosis germs. His discoveries helped to set the standard for further understanding of germ theory and to develop various life-saving vaccines for the future. Koch and Pasteur were so influential that during the Franco-Prussian War of 1870, their respective governments heavily invested in their research to showcase superior scientific advancements and national pride. As I have mentioned before, Pasteur's and Koch's work was so revolutionary that many refused to believe it. But germ theory and its knowledge was brought and became prevalent in Britain thanks to the work of high-profile British doctors such as John Tyndall, who performed similar experiments as Pasteur to prove that microbes were present in the air, William Roberts, who argued that wounds that were exposed got infected more easily, and William Cheney, who translated Koch's works to English to be widely shared and understood by British doctors. Although medicine was improving in great ways all around the world, surgery was often a gruesome and risky procedure. If the operation didn't kill you, infections would most likely do. Surgeons didn't clean their hands or tools during operations. Patients were fully awake and in extreme pain, and the death toll was extremely high. However, pioneers during the 18th and 19th century hoped to overcome 3 common issues surrounding surgery: pain, infection, and bleeding. Before the 1800s, alcohol and opium were used to distract and relieve the patient during surgery, but they had little to no success in actually easing the pain. Therefore, surgeons had to operate quickly and they would very rarely attempt complicated procedures on the patient. To solve this issue, anesthesia was developed to significantly reduce patients' pain or just to put the patient to sleep, enabling surgeons to perform new techniques that previously would have caused excruciating pain. In 1799, British surgeon Humphrey Davy discovered that nitrous oxide, famously known as laughing gas, could be quite beneficial for surgery. The gas, besides giving hysterical laughter to the patient, also removed pain during an operation. Yet, nitrous oxide was not widely used until 1844, when the American dentist Horace Wells used it to remove teeth. Horace Wells' associate, William Morton, experimented using another compound, ether, as an anesthetic, which was efficient in removing pain during surgery. After a public demonstration in 1846, many surgeons started using the anesthetic to successfully numb their patient during surgery. But ether was not perfect. It was difficult to inhale, it caused vomiting in several patients, and it was extremely flammable and, therefore, hard to store. In 1847, Scottish doctor James Simpson discovered a safer and more effective way to remove pain by using chloroform. Not only did it remove pain, but, as you most likely have seen in movies and TV shows, chloroform also makes patients unconscious during surgery. Simpson promoted the use of chloroform, and even Queen Victoria effectively used it during her 8th childbirth in 1853, making the compound well known to the public. However, there were some problems. In the early days of using chloroform, it was not fully understood that people of different sizes had to be given different doses of chloroform. For example, in 1848, a 15-year-old named Hannah Greener died from an overdose during an operation to remove her toenail. This, in addition to the traditional thinking that pain was good in some instances, such as during war or pregnancy, led to an opposition to use anesthetics. Despite this, the development of anesthetics helped surgeons to work with patients free from pain, allowing them to perform complex surgery and overall lower mortality rates. To deal with the problem of infection and recovery during surgery, Joseph Lister, a Scottish surgeon, read Pasteur's work and applied germ theory to the field of surgery. Knowing that germs were present in the air, he experimented using carbolic acid in 1865 to soak and therefore sterilize bandages and equipment. He also encouraged surgeons to wash their hands with weak carbolic hand washes to ensure cleaner conditions. He realized that this preventative measure helped to prevent infection and heal wounds faster. This implementation in surgery was extremely effective, lowering his patients' mortality rates from 40 to 15% after using the chemical to clean his equipment. However, the use of carbolic acid also came with complaints and issues. Some doctors and nurses experienced irritations in their hands and eyes while operating, making surgery more difficult. To address this, American surgeon William Halsted asked the tire company to make rubber gloves for surgery. This innovation helped to advance the idea of aseptic surgery, which implements precautions to reduce the risk of infection. Thanks to the development and application of germ theory and anesthetics to the field of surgery, countless lives were saved, and many had the luxury to have surgery performed without the excruciating pain common in the operating table before the 19th century. Inside this medical revolution, women also began their own revolution, resisting gender norms and successfully paving their way into the medical field. Recognizable women such as Elizabeth Garrett Anderson, who was the first female doctor in Britain, Sophia Jex-Blake, a key campaigner for women's access to medical education, and also Mary Seacole and Betsy Cadwell, nurses who worked alongside Florence Nightingale during the Crimean War. These remarkable individuals all fought the strict standards of the time to allow women to learn medicine and become doctors. Their efforts resulted in the creation of the London School of Medicine for Women in 1874 and the Enabling Act of 1876, which allowed medical examination boards to have female candidates. Now let's shift our focus back to public health. As you might remember, the Industrial Revolution led to rapid urbanization, crowded cities, and poor living conditions, which, combined with pollution and diseases, caused widespread public health issues. Cramped housing and poor waste management were major contributors to these problems. Shared privies and overflowing cesspits leaked into streets and water supplies, spreading deadly diseases like cholera. During and before the 19th century, the British government took a laissez-faire attitude towards public health and epidemics, meaning that they did not intervene and let things take their own course, believing it wasn't the government's place to interfere. However, the 1831 cholera outbreak, which killed an estimated 50,000 people, and further outbreaks in 1837, 1838, 1848, and 1853, moved the inactive government to look into the concerns and the appalling living conditions and public health at the time. But until the government did something about it, it was up to the individuals to attempt to record and raise concern for the awful living conditions in the nation. In 1837, birth and death records began to be recorded by William Farr, who proved that there was a link between living conditions and death rates. With the use of statistics and maps, he recommended that the government should be implicated in cleaning up the streets and building better infrastructure for the population. Right after the 1837 and 1838 cholera outbreaks, a lawyer, Edwin Chadwick, began his self-funded research in the living conditions of the early 1800s around Britain. In 1842, Chadwick published a report where he revealed a significant difference in life expectancy. In rural areas like Rutland, people could live up to 40 to 52 years old, while in larger cities like Manchester and Liverpool, the working class life expectancy was about 15 to 19 years old. This gap was also evident between the rich and the poor, showed that poor city residents had much shorter life expectancies, pointing to the need for cleaner streets and water. He also demonstrated that even wealthy city residents had life expectancies similar to rural workers, proving that the unkept cities themselves were the problem. Although Chadwick believed in the mistaken idea of miasma, his report helped to create awareness towards the correlation between the conditions of the working class in cities, all squished together, exploited, without clean sewers, streets or water, and the deadly diseases growing and spreading in England. Cholera, also known as the Blue Death, was a deadly disease that thrived during the early Industrial Revolution. It was mistakenly believed that cholera was caused by miasma, leading people to clean their homes and light candles desperately during outbreaks, which did nothing. The disease was actually spread through water. There was no treatment, and most people who caught it died. The government hoped it would fix itself, and even voted against the Public Health Act in 1847. It wasn't until the 1848 cholera outbreak, which killed an estimated 60,000 people, that the government finally decided to act by passing the first 1848 Public Health Act. This act set up a central board of health to oversee the development of public health. It wasn't compulsory, but local authorities could set up these boards to oversee public health, which raised taxes to pay for cleaner water supplies and new sewage systems in areas with low life expectancies. Although it didn't solve much due to its voluntary nature, it was an important first step for the government to use its power and wealth to involve itself and help its own population. Due to the government still being inactive, individuals had to carry the burden of improving public health. For example, a philanthropist, Octavia Hill, bought 2,000 slums during her lifetime, which she rebuilt to much higher standards and rented back at reasonable prices. John Snow, a well-respected doctor from London who was quite skeptical about miasma, wanted to learn how cholera was actually being spread throughout England. When cholera broke out again in Snow's hometown, Soho, London, in 1854, he decided to find out where this disease was coming from. This cholera outbreak killed around 20,000 people in London and 52,000 across England, so he conducted a study to create detailed maps of all deaths. The results of his study showed a strong link between the people getting sick and one specific water pump on Broad Street. To test this out, he convinced the local government to remove the handle of the water pump and advised the locals to drink from another water pump, which stopped the cholera outbreak almost immediately. Snow also found that the local cesspit had leaked into the water supply, probably causing the outbreak. John Snow confirmed that cholera was spread through water and proved the importance of clean and well-built sewage systems and water pipes. In 1855, Snow presented his findings to other doctors and the government, which, surprise surprise, were not accepted, as miasma was still acknowledged as the reason for the spread of the disease. It was not until the Great Stink of the summer of 1858 that the government was finally forced into full-blown action. The summer of 1858 was particularly warm and dry, and as a result, the flow of water at the Thames dropped significantly. This meant that all the sewage and waste the river used to carry out of London into the sea piled up, spreading a horrible smell that took over the whole city. The population hid inside their homes to endure the stink, but the government was finally motivated to do something when the smell took over the House of Parliament, forcing them to close and move to a building far away from London. The solution was clear: to build a new sewage system. Led by architect Joseph Bazalgette, the new sewage system was meticulously designed in 1858 and completed in 1875. This sewage system was great and also large, keeping in mind that the population of London would continue to grow. The sewage system was very effective and is still in use today. Thanks to the Great Stink and the new sewage system, the levels of cholera outbreaks were significantly reduced in London. England was in a new age of public health development, and despite its opposition, the discovery and acceptance of germ theory allowed the public and the government to finally understand why these diseases infected the population and how to prevent them. England began to move away from its laissez-faire attitude towards public health. After working-class men finally gained the vote with the Reform Act of 1867, political parties had to start listening to their complaints, as the lower class now made up the largest group of voters. In 1875, Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli's government, who appealed to workers by promising public health reforms, passed the Second Public Health Act expanding on the one from 1848. With the new Public Health Act of 1875, slums were demolished and a new standard of housing was introduced. From then on, all new houses had to meet these improved requirements. Local boards of health became compulsory and were strengthened, providing clean water supplies, building sewage systems, and appointing a medical officer for each town. Following these reforms, studies by individuals like Charles Booth and Joseph Rowntree helped to create the political will to spend more money and pass laws. Additionally, the Second Boer War between the British Empire and South Africa proved how weak the British population was. In 1899, 1 in 3 of the men who volunteered to fight were unfit to be recruited for health reasons. Poverty and unhealthy living conditions faced by many in Britain alerted the government to the risk that, if left unaddressed, the declining health of the population could threaten the stability of the British Empire. So, the Liberal Party decided to take action. Motivated by Germany's increased productivity under its welfare state and the growing popularity of the Labour Party in Britain, the Liberals viewed their reforms as a way to boost productivity and retain the support of the working class. In 1906, free school meals were introduced, followed by free medical inspections in schools in 1907. In 1908, the Children and Young Persons Act made children protected persons, which made it illegal for parents to neglect their children and gave children basic protections by the law. All these reforms drastically improved the health and well-being of British children. As you can see in this graph, free meals were very successful, increasing the healthy weight of children during school time. In 1908, the Old Age Pensions Act was also introduced, giving people over 70 years old with low annual income a pension. In 1909, the Labor Exchanges Act hoped to lower unemployment by creating job centers, matching up employers and employees. Finally, in 1911, the National Insurance Act enabled workers to access medical care, and in 1919, the Ministry of Health was set up. This was the first government department to have an overview of health across the country, and a first step in bringing progress and actual change to the health of the people. The government had left its laissez-faire approach to public health behind and began a new era of change and progressive policies to help its population.
Following the developments of germ theory and subsequent discoveries, Paul Ehrlich, who had worked with Koch using dyes to stain bacteria, was now infecting rabbits with syphilis at the start of the 20th century. These experiments led to the development of the magic bullet, which was not a bullet, but instead specific chemicals used to kill microorganisms without affecting human tissue, sort of like a sniper. Him and his assistant Sahachiro Hata tested thousands of mice and rabbits before discovering that the bacteria responsible for syphilis could be killed by a compound called Salvarsan 606, the first magic bullet. Ehrlich's discovery was groundbreaking and inspired other scientists, including fellow German researcher Gerhard Domag, who discovered the drug Prontosil. This drug killed harmful bacteria and cured blood poisoning on mice, and it was later found to work on humans, as Domag was forced to use it to save the life of his seriously ill daughter. The invention of the magic bullet is argued to be the birth of modern medicine. Scottish doctor Alexander Fleming decided to go on vacation in 1928 as he was getting stuck with his research on bacteria. When he finally returned to his messy laboratory, he came back to an astonishing discovery. Fleming's lack of organization and maybe an open window led to a fortunate accident. A petri dish he had left out became contaminated with mold, which killed the bacteria he had been studying. This unexpected discovery revealed that the mold, later identified as penicillium, was capable of destroying certain harmful bacteria. This mold was the first true antibiotic. Thanks to Fleming's keen observation and a bit of luck during a holiday break, medicine gained a powerful tool to treat bacterial infections. Although Fleming discovered penicillin in 1928, it wasn't until 1941 that the first successful human trial took place. During the bloody First World War, medics would use antiseptics to prevent and clean infections, but these antiseptics essentially did not cure the patient. With the discoveries of antibiotics, however, medics could now save multiple lives on the battlefield. At the University of Oxford, two researchers, Howard Florey and Ernst Chain, used Fleming's discovery and developed methods to extract, purify, and produce penicillin to be distributed in mass during World War II. Under the threat of German bombs and luring dollars, Florey and Chain moved to America to develop penicillin at an industrial level. The University of Wisconsin in Madison perfected methods to cultivate, extract, and purify penicillin and mass produce it as it became an essential medicine across the battlefields of Germany and the islands of Japan. This miracle drug, extensively used during World War II, saved thousands of Allied lives. By D-Day, enough penicillin was made for all Allied troops at around 2.3 million doses, saving an estimated 15% of soldiers from dying. This project was so essential that you could compare it in significance to the Manhattan Project. Also during the Second World War, Dorothy Crawford Hodgkin and her team determined the molecular structure of penicillin, a crucial breakthrough that helped scientists understand how the antibiotic worked and improved its mass production, establishing it as a widely used and effective medicine. Alexander Fleming warned that misuse of antibiotics could lead to resistant bacteria, and he was right. In the 1940s and 50s, overuse in England led to resistance, making infections harder to treat and sometimes deadly. Antibiotics were also overused in farming to speed up animal growth. People then consumed these antibiotics through meat, which added to the problem. Now let's talk about surgery. Before the Renaissance, surgery faced three major problems: pain, infection, and bleeding. By the early 1900s, two of these, pain and infection, had been largely solved. However, bleeding remained a serious issue and continued to claim the life of many patients during surgery. Since the 17th century, surgeons had attempted blood transfusions, but many patients died for unknown reasons. In 1901, Austrian scientist Karl Landsteiner discovered the four types of blood, A, B, AB, and O, and therefore realized that transfusions failed because mixing incompatible blood types caused dangerous reactions. After this, transfusions became much safer. This discovery was crucial, especially during World War I. However, a major problem remained. Blood couldn't be stored because it clotted quickly. This changed in 1914 when Belgian doctor Albert Hustin found that adding sodium citrate prevented clotting, allowing blood to be stored and used later without the donor and patient being present at the same time. German engineer Wilhelm Röntgen, while experimenting with lasers, discovered a mysterious ray he called the X-ray. This ray could pass through paper, wood, and human flesh, but not through metal or bone. This meant doctors and surgeons could now see inside the body to find broken bones or other objects like bullets or blades. This discovery opened a window into the human body and led to the creation of a new medical specialty, radiology. X-rays also played a crucial role in saving lives during the First World War. For example, Marie Curie, famous for discovering radioactivity, focused on using this technology on the battlefield. She developed a portable X-ray machine and trained nurses to use it, allowing doctors to quickly diagnose and treat wounded soldiers. After identifying injuries with the portable X-ray, doctors used the Thomas splint, an invention by Hugh Owen Thomas made before the war, to stabilize broken bones and reduce blood loss. This splint, still used today, lowered the death rate for soldiers with broken thigh bones from 80% to 20%, and also reduced the number of amputations. During the final year of World War I in 1918, Europe was struck by the Spanish influenza, named because the disease was first widely reported in neutral Spain. This global pandemic killed millions, including 228,000 people in Britain. The Spanish influenza hit healthy young adults the hardest, often leading to deadly cases of bacterial pneumonia. In Britain, the response was poorly coordinated, as the government gave health advice too late and left local councils to handle the crisis on their own. Besides this, the pandemic led to the establishment of the Ministry of Health in 1919. After the Great War, where around 900,000 British soldiers died, many who survived came home with serious injuries and mental health issues caused by the horrors they had faced. Some were disfigured, while many others suffered from a condition known as shell shock, a form of severe psychological trauma caused by constant bombardment and stress in the trenches. To help disfigured soldiers, New Zealand surgeon Harold Gillis set up a special unit during the First World War, where he used skin grafts to rebuild damaged faces, marking the beginning of modern facial surgery. To treat mental health issues, options were limited, mostly rest, simple activities, or in some cases, harsh physical treatments. As a result, many veterans continued to suffer long after the war. Mental health pioneers like William Rivers rejected the idea that shell shock was purely physical. He believed it was caused by psychological trauma and encouraged more humane treatments, focusing on empathy and understanding instead of punishment. As for social acceptance, sculptor Francis Wood created lifelike facial masks for soldiers with severe facial injuries, and engineer James Hanger developed prosthetic limbs for amputees. These efforts helped veterans regain confidence, supported their mental health, and made it easier for them to return to everyday life. These medical advancements continued into the Second World War, but with major improvement. The introduction of penicillin, as mentioned earlier, saved millions of lives by preventing and treating infections right on the battlefield. Dr. Charles Drew also transformed wartime medicine with his blood banking system, which allowed blood plasma to be safely stored and transported. Plasma helped replace lost fluids and treat shock, and his work ensured a steady supply, greatly improving survival rates for wounded soldiers. After the massive death and suffering caused by the First and Second World Wars, people began to see life and the role of government differently. Many people began to question how a government that has sent so many soldiers to die could do more to support its people after the war. The wars also revealed serious health problems in Britain. Many volunteers were turned away because they were unfit to serve. When 3 million children were evacuated to the countryside, rural families were shocked by how poor and unhealthy city children were. In 1942, government civil servant William Beveridge published the Beveridge Report. It called for more government action to tackle 5 big problems, which he called the 5 giants: idleness from lack of jobs, ignorance from a lack of education, disease from poor healthcare, squalor from bad housing, and want because of poverty. The report became very popular, and for the first time, many people believed the government, after years of ignoring the poor, could actually help its citizens. Following the Beveridge Report and World War II, the Labour Party won a landslide victory and set out to build a comprehensive welfare state, expanding on the earlier liberal reforms. One of their most important achievements was the creation of the National Health Service, or NHS. As mentioned earlier, the NHS was inspired by the best-selling report of Sir William Beveridge and the devastating impact of World War I and World War II. In the aftermath of the wars, the Labour Party looked for a bold solution to ensure that everyone in the UK could access high-quality public healthcare. When Clement Attlee became Prime Minister in 1945, he appointed Nye Bevan as Health Minister. It was Bevan who led the charge to create the NHS as we know it today. When Bevan introduced his National Health Service Bill in 1946, it faced fierce resistance. A former chairman of the British Medical Association, also known as BMA, even compared it to German National Socialism, warning that the bill would turn the Minister of Health into a medical Führer. By 1947, Bevan had overcome opposition from local government bodies, voluntary hospitals, consultants, the Socialist Medical Association, and even dissent within the Labour cabinet. Yet the BMA remained the last major opponent. Despite the opposition, the NHS was successfully launched on July 5, 1948, where Bevan laid out 3 founding principles. First, that the service would be available to everyone. Second, that healthcare would be free at the point of use. And third, that care would be provided based on need and not on the ability to pay. The NHS revolutionized healthcare in Britain, drastically reducing infant mortality rates and improving overall health and life expectancy. However, financial struggles soon emerged. In 1951, budget cuts led to reduced NHS funding and prompted Bevan to resign. In 1952, charges were introduced for prescriptions, spectacles, and dental services. Underfunding continued to be an issue, though health outcomes still improved. Public health legislation also shaped the NHS role in society. After a 5-year campaign, Tobacco advertisements were banned in 2005, followed by a public smoking ban in 2007, reducing smoking-related illnesses and hospital admissions. More recently, the NHS faced unprecedented challenges during the COVID-19 pandemic, with staff working under extreme pressure to meet demands for treatments, accommodations, and vaccines. Although the pandemic has technically ended, the NHS continues to struggle with significant staff shortages and the long-term impact of funding constraints and austerity measures implemented over the past 16 years. Recent strikes by NHS workers reflect ongoing frustrations over pay, working conditions, and resource shortages. After the World Wars, peaceful times, especially in the West, allowed scientists to focus on advancing health and technology. The 1950s and 60s saw significant medical breakthroughs. In 1953, James Watson and Francis Crick, building on crucial work by Rosalind Franklin, discovered DNA's double helix structure, revolutionizing biology and medicine and paving the way for genetic research, which culminated in the Human Genome Project that mapped most of the human genome by 2003. In 1956, a national polio immunization program was launched, drastically reducing cases. In 1960, the first successful kidney transplant happened, followed by the first lung transplant in 1963, and liver and heart transplants in 1967. Public health legislation successfully reduced smoking rates, but new challenges have emerged. Vaping has replaced cigarettes, and over 64% of adults in England are now considered overweight or obese. As we've already mentioned, antibiotic resistance remains a serious threat, highlighting the importance of using medicine responsibly. At the same time, alternative medicines have gained popularity, some fueled by social media, with movements like anti-vax reflecting growing distrust in government and modern medicine. Other alternatives, such as psychedelic mushrooms, CBD, and THC, are now less criminalized and increasingly accepted for medical treatments. Today, we are fortunate to be at the end of this study guide and not at the beginning. We can prevent, treat, and even cure diseases better than ever before, leading to longer human lifespans. Now we have new challenges, worsening air quality, rising oceans, and even the possibility of microplastics in our brain. Thanks for watching, and good luck.